The year was 1978, and Los Angeles was alive with bright lights, fast cars, and faces that dreamed of fame. Among those faces was Evelyn Hart, a young woman from Oregon who had come to Hollywood with little more than a suitcase and a belief that she was meant for something great. Evelyn wasn't born into fame. She grew up in a quiet town, where the biggest event of the year was the county fair. Her father worked at a lumber mill and her mother ran a small bakery. They were simple people, proud of their daughter but nervous about her decision to chase Hollywood dreams. When Evelyn turned 20, she packed her clothes, her favorite book, and a photo of her family and took a bus to California. By 1978, Evelyn had made it further than most who came chasing stardust. She had done small TV roles, a few commercials, and finally, a role in a mystery film called The Glass Veil. Critics noticed her right away. She had a quiet grace, a way of saying so much with her eyes that directors remembered her name. For the first time, she started to believe she could be something more than a struggling actress waiting tables between auditions. That summer, her career seemed ready to take off. She was attending more events, meeting producers, and talking about a new role that could make her a household name. The movie studio had arranged a small celebration at a house in the Hollywood Hills, a casual party for cast and crew. Evelyn wasn't fond of parties. She preferred quiet evenings with a book or a walk along the beach. But her agent insisted it was good for her career to be seen. The party was like most Hollywood gatherings: loud music, laughter, and too many people trying to impress one another. Evelyn arrived a little after 9 p.m., dressed in a simple white dress that made her stand out in a room full of sequins and sparkle. She greeted a few familiar faces and spent most of the evening near the balcony, where she could breathe and look out over the city lights. A few people noticed she seemed distracted. One of her co-stars later said Evelyn looked restless, like her mind was somewhere else. Around midnight, she said goodbye to a small group of friends and mentioned she had an early meeting the next day. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. When she didn't show up for her meeting the next morning, her agent called her apartment. No answer. By afternoon, he called the police. Evelyn's car, a light blue 1976 Mustang, was found 2 miles from the party, parked awkwardly near a construction site. The driver's door was open, her purse was still inside, and her car keys were in the ignition. At first, police believed it was a case of exhaustion or maybe a breakdown. Hollywood was known for chewing people up. Too much pressure, too much attention. But when hours turned into days and then weeks, it was clear something terrible had happened. Her disappearance became front-page news. "Starlet vanishes without a trace," the headlines read. Reporters surrounded the police station, and news cameras camped outside her apartment building. Friends and fans held candlelight vigils. Her parents flew in from Oregon, their faces pale and hopeful, pleading for any information that might lead them to their daughter. Detectives interviewed dozens of people from the party, but no one could say what happened after she left. One witness thought he saw her arguing with a man near the parking lot, but the description was too vague to follow. Another person said they saw her car on the road later that night, but couldn't be sure it was her driving. The case became stranger with each passing day. There was no sign of a struggle near the car, no fingerprints that didn't belong, and no evidence she had run away. Her bank account was untouched and her passport was still in her apartment. The only thing missing was Evelyn. Her mother refused to believe she was gone. Every week she called the Los Angeles Police Department, asking if there were new leads. Sometimes she even flew back to the city to walk the streets herself, handing out missing posters and talking to strangers. "Someone knows something," she would say to reporters, her voice trembling but firm. The months passed and the story faded from the headlines. A few television shows mentioned her case during Halloween specials, spinning wild theories: kidnappers, secret lovers, cults. None of it helped. None of it was true. For her close friends, the hardest part was not knowing. There was no goodbye, no answers, just silence. One friend, an actress who had shared an apartment with Evelyn when they were both starting out, said she couldn't bring herself to move out of the city. "Every time I drive past that construction site," she said, "I feel like she's still out there somewhere waiting to come home." By the end of 1979, the investigation had slowed down. Detectives were moved to new cases. New stars filled the magazines, and Hollywood kept shining, even as Evelyn's name slowly disappeared from its lights. Her family returned to Oregon, broken-hearted but unable to let go completely. Her mother left Evelyn's bedroom exactly as it was, the posters on the wall, the small vanity mirror, the perfume bottle half full. Every year on her birthday, they lit a candle and prayed. People whispered about her for years. Some said she ran away to escape fame. Others believed she was taken by someone from the industry who didn't want her to succeed. A few even claimed to see her in other cities, though none of those sightings ever proved real. Time went on, and Evelyn Hart became a name people mentioned when talking about Hollywood mysteries. Younger actors heard her story and felt a chill. There was something haunting about it, a reminder that dreams could disappear just as easily as they came true. But for the people who had truly known her, the girl who loved poetry, who called her mother every Sunday, who still wrote letters by hand, she wasn't a mystery. She was a daughter, a friend, a person who deserved to be found. On the 22nd anniversary of her disappearance, a small article appeared in a local newspaper, written by a retired detective who had worked her case. He called her the one I never forgot. He wrote that sometimes at night he would dream he was back at that construction site, flashlight in hand, calling out her name into the empty tunnels. He ended the piece with a line that would later feel almost prophetic. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes the earth remembers. At the time, no one paid much attention to it. But 22 years later, those words would echo back when a group of workers digging beneath Los Angeles made a discovery that would finally bring Evelyn Hart's story back into the light, or rather, out from the dark beneath it. For now, though, in 1978, the world only knew this. A beautiful young actress with a promising future had vanished into thin air. And for the next 2 decades, everyone was left wondering where she went, and why no one could find her. In the days following Evelyn Hart's disappearance, Los Angeles seemed to change. The lights were still bright, the stars still sparkled in the night sky, but for those who knew her, something felt off, like the city itself was holding its breath. Police continued their search. They combed through the Hollywood Hills, sent divers into nearby reservoirs, and interviewed anyone who might have seen her that night. Flyers with Evelyn's face were plastered on telephone poles, store windows, and newspaper stands. Her warm smile and soft eyes stared back at strangers from every corner of the city. Detective Warren Hayes was one of the men assigned to the case. He had worked in missing persons for nearly 10 years, but this one was different. Evelyn wasn't the type to vanish. Her apartment was neat, no signs of a struggle. Her mail was unopened, her schedule for the next week neatly written on a notepad by her phone. Her refrigerator still had groceries for the week, milk, fruit, leftovers. Everything suggested she had planned to come back. The only real clue was her car. It sat near a fenced-off construction site for a new underground parking structure. The area was still being built with half-dug trenches and piles of dirt everywhere. Police searched the site for days but found nothing that pointed to what happened. One of the construction workers mentioned he saw a woman matching Evelyn's description walking near the edge of the site late that night, but he assumed she was just lost. Rumors began to swirl. Some tabloids claimed Evelyn had run away with a married producer. Others said she had been spotted in Mexico, or that she joined a cult that promised fame and spiritual power. Every week there was a new theory, a new supposed witness. None of them were true. Her parents clung to hope, though the sleepless nights were wearing them down. Her mother often said, "I can feel she's still out there." By the end of the first month, the official investigation was slowing. There were no fingerprints, no ransom notes, no real leads. The police believed she was either kidnapped or had fallen victim to an accident no one had witnessed. But Detective Hayes couldn't let it go. Something about the case felt unfinished, like there was a missing piece right in front of him. He revisited the party guest list and went door to door, re-interviewing everyone who had seen Evelyn that night. Most remembered her as quiet and polite. One producer said she seemed nervous that evening, almost as if she didn't want to be there. Another person recalled a heated conversation she had near the parking area with a man no one could identify. Witnesses described him vaguely: tall, dark hair, wearing a gray jacket. When police looked into everyone who matched that description from the guest list, none of them fit. As months passed, the media lost interest. New scandals took over the headlines. New stars rose to fame, and Evelyn's name faded from daily conversation. Still, for those closest to her, time stood still. Her parents stayed in touch with the detective, visiting Los Angeles every few months. They would visit the construction site where her car had been found, standing behind the chain-link fence and staring out over the half-finished concrete foundations. "This is the last place she was," her mother would whisper, tears quietly running down her cheeks. By the following year, the construction site was completed, a large office building with an underground level that few ever thought about. People parked their cars there every day, unaware of the story that once haunted the ground beneath them. Evelyn's old co-star, a woman named Claire, tried to keep her memory alive. She often spoke about Evelyn in interviews, describing her as gentle, genuine, and a little too kind for Hollywood. She said Evelyn had a habit of writing letters to herself, little notes of encouragement she would keep in a small box by her bedside. One of those notes, found later, read, "Don't let this city change who you are." By 1981, the case had officially gone cold. Detective Hayes was transferred to another department. He still kept the file, though, a thick folder filled with photographs, witness statements, and reports that led nowhere. Every so often, he would open it at home and reread the final notes, hoping a detail might stand out. Years rolled by. New detectives came and went, and Evelyn's name became more of a sad legend than an active case. Sometimes young actors in Los Angeles would hear the story and drive past the place where her car was found, imagining the moment she vanished. Some even said the area was cursed. For her family, life never fully went back to normal. Her mother still ran the bakery in Oregon, but her smile had grown faint. Every time a customer mentioned Evelyn's name, her eyes would well up. Her father stopped talking about the case altogether. It hurt too much. He kept Evelyn's photograph on his workbench, though, wiping the dust from the frame every night. There were a few strange moments over the years that made people wonder. In 1984, a hiker found a woman's shoe deep in a wooded area outside Los Angeles, similar to the one Evelyn was last seen wearing. The police tested it, but it wasn't hers. In 1987, an anonymous letter was sent to a local newspaper claiming Evelyn was alive and living under a new name. The letter turned out to be fake. Every small lead ended the same way: disappointment. Still, Detective Hayes couldn't let go of one detail that had always bothered him: the construction site. During the first investigation, the workers had said parts of the underground area were sealed early due to unstable ground. They had poured concrete over several sections, leaving unfinished rooms and tunnels that were never inspected afterward. He wondered if anything what could have been missed down there. But by then, the building was in full use and no one wanted to tear it apart for a theory. In 1990, a documentary about unsolved Hollywood mysteries included Evelyn's story. It brought the case back into public attention for a short while. People wrote letters to the police claiming they had dreams or visions about where she might be. Some of those letters described dark places, tunnels, basements, closed spaces. None of it led to real evidence, but it was strange how many people imagined her being trapped underground. Over the years, even the detective grew old. He retired and moved to a quieter town. Sometimes, while sitting on his porch, he would think about her, the girl in the white dress walking into the night, never to be seen again. He had spent so many years trying to find her that she had become part of his life story too. Her parents passed away within a few years of each other, never learning the truth. They were buried side by side with a space between them for Evelyn, just in case she was ever found. On their shared tombstone were the words, "We never stopped waiting." By the late 1990s, few people in Hollywood still remembered Evelyn Hart. Her films played occasionally on late-night television, her name appearing briefly in the credits before fading into the next scene. New generations came along, unaware of the mystery that once captured the city. But stories have a strange way of waiting. Sometimes even after decades, the truth finds a way to surface. And in the year 2000, long after the city had forgotten her name, Evelyn's story was about to return. Not through rumor or speculation, but through something buried deep beneath the earth that had waited patiently to be discovered. No one could have guessed that 22 years after she vanished, the ground itself would reveal what had been hidden all along. The year 2000 began like any other in Los Angeles. The city was changing, growing taller and faster, full of new faces who barely remembered the names that had once filled its headlines. The mystery of Evelyn Hart had become one of those old Hollywood stories people told in passing. A strange, sad legend that had long since gone quiet. But deep beneath the city streets, something was waiting to be found. It started one warm morning in early spring. A small maintenance crew had been assigned to restore an old section of the sewer system near downtown. The tunnels were narrow and damp, their walls lined with thick layers of dust and rusted pipes. For years, that part of the system had been sealed off due to construction above it. Now the city wanted it cleared for new development. The crew worked slowly, clearing debris and checking for gas leaks. Around noon, one of the workers noticed something strange. A wall deep inside the tunnel looked newer than the rest. Smooth concrete where the other walls were rough and cracked. At first, they thought it was a repair patch, but when they tapped it with a hammer, it gave off a hollow sound. Curiosity got the better of them. They called their supervisor, who allowed them to break through a small section. The first hole released a rush of stale air that smelled of dust and age. Behind the wall, they discovered a narrow passageway leading to what looked like an unfinished room. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing something eerie. The space was small, like an underground room built out of concrete and metal. In the corner was an old chair, a small table, and a broken lamp. There were boxes, papers, and what looked like old film reels stacked along the walls. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dirt. It felt like stepping into a forgotten world. One of the workers noticed something else. On the wall above the table, there was a mirror, cracked down the middle. And just below it, half buried in dust, was a handbag. When they picked it up, it crumbled at the seams, but inside were old photographs and a small notebook. The name written inside was clear: Evelyn Hart. At first, the men didn't know who that was, but one of them, an older man who had lived in Los Angeles his whole life, froze. "That name," he said quietly. "She was the actress who disappeared years ago." Within hours, the police arrived. The tunnel was sealed off again, and the area became a crime scene. Forensics teams carefully documented every inch of the hidden room. It looked like someone had lived there or been kept there for some time. There were personal items scattered around: a compact mirror, a comb, a faded photograph of a young woman and her parents, and several film scripts with Evelyn's name written in neat handwriting at the top. And then, in one corner of the small underground space, they found what everyone had feared. Covered in dust and debris were the remains of a person. Time had reduced everything to bone, but the posture told a quiet story, as if she had been sitting and simply never moved again. Nearby lay a glass bottle with faded fingerprints, and beside it, a notebook whose pages were fragile but still legible. The discovery made headlines almost immediately. After 22 years, Evelyn Hart had been found. The city was stunned. The story that had once been forgotten now filled the news again, with reporters rushing to the site, police giving careful statements, and the public revisiting old questions. How had she ended up beneath the earth? And who had built that hidden place? Forensic teams confirmed the DNA match within a week. It was Evelyn. The confirmation brought both relief and sadness. She had finally been found, but her story was far from over. Detectives reopened the case, piecing together what might have happened. The tunnel where she was discovered had been connected to an old construction project from the late 1970s, the same one where her car was found. Back then, parts of the underground site had been sealed because of safety issues. It appeared that one section had been converted into a private space before it was closed off. Inside the hidden room, investigators found something even more chilling: an old tape recorder, rusted but intact. When technicians managed to restore a portion of the tape, it played faint voices, too damaged to make out clearly, but one of them sounded like Evelyn. There were no screams, no violence, only quiet moments, as if someone had recorded her speaking softly about her day. The notebook they found gave the clearest picture of her final days. Her handwriting was delicate, neat at first, but shakier as the pages went on. The early entries spoke about confusion. She wrote about waking up in a strange place underground, about hearing footsteps above her. She mentioned someone bringing her food and water, though she never named who it was. In later entries, her tone changed. She wrote about trying to stay calm, praying and thinking about her family. The final page ended mid-sentence, the ink faded as if the pen had run dry. The investigators also uncovered the remains of an old construction badge buried beneath some of the rubble. It belonged to a man who had worked at the site in 1978, a foreman who had disappeared shortly after Evelyn. His name had been briefly mentioned in the original case files, but he was never considered a suspect because he had moved out of state and vanished himself. Detectives began piecing it all together. The theory that emerged was heartbreaking but plausible. The man, who had a history of obsession and erratic behavior, had likely known Evelyn through one of the film studios or from working near the set. He may have admired her from afar and built the underground room as a hideaway. Whether he intended harm or simply wanted to keep her there, no one could be sure. But when part of the tunnel collapsed due to unstable ground, both of them might have been trapped. As the news spread, people across the country were drawn back into Evelyn's story. Documentaries and newspaper features revisited her short career. Fans of old Hollywood films shared her scenes online, talking about her quiet beauty and natural presence on screen. Younger generations who had never heard her name before were now seeing her face everywhere again. The retired detective Warren Hayes, now in his late 70s, saw the story on television. He sat in his living room, tears in his eyes, whispering, "They found her." For years he had imagined every possible ending, but nothing had prepared him for the truth, that she had been so close all along, hidden right beneath the city he had searched. In the days that followed, investigators continued exploring the underground tunnels, mapping every inch to ensure there were no other sealed spaces. What they found painted a picture of how quickly the past can disappear beneath progress. The construction work from decades earlier had buried the entire section, trapping everything inside like a forgotten time capsule. The items recovered from the site, Evelyn's notebook, the mirror, the handbag, and the scripts, were preserved carefully. Her family's surviving relatives came forward to claim her remains and finally give her a proper burial. On the day of the ceremony, the sun was bright and calm. A small crowd gathered, including people who had worked with her long ago. They spoke softly, remembering her kindness, her laughter, and the way she always believed she would make her mark in the world. And in a strange way she had, not through fame or fortune, but through the story that had touched so many hearts. The truth had finally surfaced, brought to light by time, chance, and the determination of those who never forgot. But even as her story reached its end, there remained an unshakable feeling that somewhere in the deep silence beneath the city, the echoes of Evelyn Hart's final days still lingered, whispering softly through the tunnels she never meant to enter. The discovery of Evelyn Hart's remains shook the city. News channels covered every detail, old newspapers were reprinted, and talk shows invited people who had once known her. After 22 years of silence, everyone wanted to understand how a young woman with so much promise ended up beneath the ground, forgotten for decades. Detectives reopened the case fully. The investigation was now led by a new team, but they worked closely with retired officer Warren Hayes, who had been one of the first to search for Evelyn back in 1978. He still remembered every inch of that construction site, every clue that led nowhere, and every sleepless night wondering what he had missed. When the police uncovered the old construction records, things started to make sense. The underground area where Evelyn had been found was part of a parking structure built in the late 70s. The records showed that one section of the lower tunnels had been sealed earlier than planned because of ground instability. The site foreman at the time was a man named Daniel Cole. Daniel's name appeared in the original case file, mentioned once by a worker who claimed Daniel had been acting strangely around the time Evelyn disappeared. He had left the job suddenly and was never seen again. His family later said he moved to another state for work, but no one ever confirmed where. In the years that followed, he too had simply vanished. Detectives tracked down old co-workers who remembered Daniel. Most described him as quiet but intense, someone who preferred working alone, often staying late after everyone else had gone home. One worker said Daniel was fixated on things that didn't matter, like making sure no one entered the lower tunnels once they were sealed. He was secretive, and a few men even joked that he had built himself a private bunker down there. That didn't seem like more than a strange habit at the time. But now, decades later, it painted a darker picture. Investigators believed Daniel might have built a hidden room inside the construction site, using leftover materials. Perhaps he had planned it as a personal space or hideout. But somehow Evelyn had ended up there, and never left. Inside the room beside Evelyn's belongings, police found traces of 2 sets of footprints preserved in the dust, one smaller, one larger. They also found old food cans and a rusted lantern. It appeared that someone else had lived down there for a while before the tunnel collapsed or was sealed completely. The notebook found beside Evelyn became the key to understanding what happened. Forensic specialists carefully restored the fragile pages. Her words were heartbreaking but calm. She wrote about confusion at first, waking up in a place with no windows, unsure how she got there. Then she mentioned hearing a man's voice above her, speaking softly but not answering her questions. She wrote about trying to reason with him, trying to convince him to let her go. But the entries soon changed. The man had told her that the world outside was not safe, that people were trying to use her and that he was protecting her. She didn't believe him, but she tried to stay calm. One line stood out from her diary. It read, "He says he is saving me, but I can't understand what I need saving from." The final entries were short and shaky. She wrote about darkness, about silence, about waiting for footsteps that never came again. Then the pages stopped. Detectives concluded that Daniel Cole had taken Evelyn, likely from near her car that night, and brought her to the underground space he had secretly built. He may have convinced himself he was helping her or keeping her safe, but when the tunnel collapsed or when he was unable to return, she was trapped alone. The story broke the hearts of those who heard it. It wasn't the scandalous Hollywood tale that the tabloids had once imagined. It was something far sadder, a story of loneliness, obsession, and a young woman who had trusted the wrong person. When reporters asked retired Detective Hayes what he thought, he said quietly, "It wasn't evil in the way people think of evil. It was madness mixed with delusion, and in the end she was just forgotten under all the concrete." The police searched for any trace of Daniel Cole, but no record of him existed after 1979. Some believed he might have died when part of the tunnel caved in. Others thought he ran away and changed his identity, but there was never any proof either way. As the investigation concluded, attention turned to Evelyn's life, not just her death. Film studios re-released The Glass Veil, the movie that had made her a rising star. Fans and historians watched it again, noticing small moments, the way she smiled, the way her voice trembled in one emotional scene, and felt an ache for what could have been. One evening, a small memorial event was held in Hollywood. People who had worked with her came to share stories. Her former co-star Claire stood on stage and spoke softly about the night Evelyn disappeared. She said she often dreamed of her friend still in that white dress standing under the city lights. She wanted to act because she loved people, Claire said. Not for fame or money, but because she believed stories could make people feel less alone. And now, after all these years, her own story has done exactly that. Even people who had never met Evelyn felt connected to her. Letters poured in from around the world and from fans, filmmakers, and strangers who said her story reminded them to hold on to the people they love. In Oregon, a cousin who was one of the last living members of Evelyn's family received her ashes. She said it felt like bringing her home at last. The small town where Evelyn grew up held a candlelight vigil in her honor. The bakery her mother once ran opened its doors again for that day only, and neighbors filled the place with flowers and old photographs. Retired Detective Hayes also attended the vigil. He stood quietly in the back, watching the soft glow of candles flicker in the night. When someone asked him how it felt to finally have closure, he shook his head slowly. "Closure isn't the right word," he said. "You don't close something like this. You just learn to live with it." Over time, documentaries were made about Evelyn's case, but unlike the sensational stories from the past, these new films focused on her humanity, her dreams, her kindness, her quiet strength. They showed her as more than a victim. In one interview, a filmmaker said, "Evelyn's story isn't about tragedy. It's about time, memory, and how the truth can survive even when buried deep. The earth held her secret, but it also protected it until someone was ready to find it." Years later, a plaque was placed near the site where she had been found. It read simply, "In memory of Evelyn Hart, beloved daughter, dreamer, and actress. Lost but never forgotten. People still leave flowers there sometimes. Tourists stop and take photos not because it's famous, but because it feels sacred in its own quiet way." Even now, her story continues to echo in Hollywood. New actors who arrive chasing their dreams often hear her name. Some say they feel a strange calm when they learn about her, as if she's still watching over the dreamers who come after her. Evelyn Hart's life was brief, but her story reminds people that even when something or someone is lost, the truth has a way of finding its way to the surface. It may take years, it may take decades, but the earth remembers, and so, after 22 years beneath the ground, Evelyn's story finally rose into the light, not just as a mystery solved, but as a piece of history that still touches hearts. When the truth about Evelyn Hart's fate finally came to light, something changed in the city that had once forgotten her. Los Angeles is a place that rarely looks back. It is built on dreams that rise and fade, faces that shine brightly and then disappear without a trace. But Evelyn's story made people pause. For a moment, the city stopped chasing the next big thing and remembered the girl who had once smiled so brightly on its screens. The following months were filled with reflection. News outlets ran quiet features about her life, not her disappearance. Old interviews resurfaced, clips of Evelyn laughing during talk shows, her soft voice answering questions with humility. People saw her not as a mystery or tragedy anymore, but as a person who had once carried big dreams and simple hopes. Film historians began revisiting her only major movie, The Glass Veil. It was re-released on television with a short introduction about her life. Viewers watched her face on the screen, graceful and expressive, and they couldn't help but imagine what more she could have done. Young actors said they found courage in her story, courage to keep going but also to stay grounded. Her final resting place was chosen carefully. Her ashes were placed beside her parents in a quiet cemetery near her hometown in Oregon. On the day of the burial, the sky was overcast, but the air was calm. The ceremony was simple. There were no reporters, no flashing cameras, just a small group of people who loved her, her cousins, old friends, and a few who had worked with her in Hollywood long ago. Retired Detective Hayes attended, standing in silence as the urn was placed in the ground. He had grown frail, his hair completely gray, but he looked peaceful. For more than 2 decades, her case had haunted him. That day, he finally allowed himself to let go. When it was over, he stayed behind for a moment, brushing his hand over the fresh soil. "You can rest now," he whispered. In the months that followed, Evelyn's name began to appear again, not in the way it had before, but as a symbol. Writers used her story as a reminder of how quickly fame can vanish, and how behind the glamour there are real people, fragile and hopeful like anyone else. A small group of film students from Los Angeles decided to make a documentary about her life. They didn't want to focus on the crime or the mystery. Instead, they wanted to show who she had been, the daughter who wrote letters home, the actress who brought warmth to every set she worked on, the woman who never stopped believing in kindness. They interviewed her old neighbors, her acting coach, and even the owner of the diner, where she used to eat breakfast before auditions. When the documentary was released a year later, it surprised everyone. It wasn't a big production, but it moved people deeply. It showed old photos of Evelyn laughing with her friends, reading scripts, feeding stray cats near her apartment. The film ended with a shot of her final resting place, covered in wildflowers, as a voice read one of her diary lines softly. "If I can leave even a small light behind, then I've done what I came here to do." That one line became famous. People began sharing it online, printing it on posters, and writing it in journals. For the first time in years, Evelyn's story was no longer about her disappearance. No, it was about her light. The site in Los Angeles where she had been found also changed. The city built a small memorial near the entrance of the tunnel, a simple bronze plaque that read, "In memory of Evelyn Hart. May the dreams buried in darkness always find their way to the light." Every few months, someone would leave flowers there, lilies, roses, sometimes small handwritten notes. People who had never known her would stop by on their lunch breaks or evening walks. Some said they felt peace there, as if the place itself had softened. One evening, Claire, her former co-star and close friend, visited the memorial quietly. She was older now, her hair silver, her voice softer than before. She placed a single white rose beneath the plaque and stood there for a long time. "You were right," she said softly, almost as if Evelyn could hear her. Stories really do live forever, and she was right. Evelyn's story continued to live, not in gossip columns or crime shows, but in hearts. She became part of the city's collective memory, a symbol of the humanity behind every Hollywood dream. Even in the film industry, Her name started to carry new meaning. Some young actresses mentioned her in interviews as an inspiration, not because of her fame, but because of her sincerity. One said, "She reminds me that you can be kind and still strong, gentle and still brave." In 2002, the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce decided to honor her with a star on the Walk of Fame. It was placed not far from the studio where she had filmed The Glass Veil. On the day of the ceremony, a small crowd gathered. The air was full of cameras and murmurs, but the moment felt sacred. Claire gave a short speech, her voice trembling slightly. "Evelyn was a bright soul," she said. "She didn't get to finish her story, so it's up to us to keep telling it, not with sadness, but with love." When the cloth was lifted and the sunlight hit the polished star, people clapped softly. Some smiled, others wiped their eyes. For a brief moment, the noise of the city faded, and all that could be heard was the whisper of the wind. That evening, as the sun went down, someone placed a candle by the star. It flickered gently, catching the reflection of Evelyn's name. Over the years, that candlelight became a quiet tradition. Every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, people would gather there to light candles and remember her. No speeches, no cameras, just light. Detective Hayes passed away a few years later. Among his belongings was the old case file, neatly organized with a single note taped to the front. It read, "Found at last. The city remembers." His family donated the file to a small museum dedicated to unsolved and rediscovered mysteries of Los Angeles. Visitors often stopped at Evelyn's section the longest. Decades later, her story still moves people. Teachers share it with students studying film, and journalists reference it when writing about forgotten stars. The idea that something, or someone, could be lost for so long and then found again gives people hope. There's a saying that began circulating after her story resurfaced. The earth keeps secrets, but it never keeps them forever. It became almost a proverb in the city, a quiet reminder that truth has a way of rising. No matter how much time has passed, for those who loved Evelyn, the pain never fully went away. But they learned to see her story as something more than sorrow. It became a lesson about compassion, about remembering those who disappear too soon, and about the fragile beauty of human life. And for those who never knew her, she became a symbol of resilience, proof that even in the darkest places, light can still exist. Sometimes, late at night, passers-by near her memorial claim they can hear faint echoes, not words, not voices, just a feeling. A warmth, as if the place itself remembers her kindness. Whether that's true or not doesn't matter. What matters is that Evelyn Hart's story, once buried deep beneath the earth, continues to live above it, in the hearts of people who never forgot her and in the city that finally learned to listen. Her story ended where it began, in light. Not the flashing kind from cameras or marquees, but the gentle kind that never fades.